Welcome everyone to a very special episode of Chat, Grapple and Cheap Pops podcast. I am Chris Dredd. I'm here with my main man JB, and today we have got a very, very special guest with us, man. We have got a New York Times best-selling author, television producer, all-round wrestling knowledge god, Mr. Keith Elliot Greenberg. How you doing, man?
Good. Too bad I didn't meet you guys in person when I was in the UK last week.
Yeah, sucks, man. We saw you, your suitcase full of books was pretty empty by the end.
It was actually empty towards over a bunch of books. I filled a suitcase because there was a fear from the publisher that we wouldn't be able to ship them all on time. And I was in 3 different locations. And by the middle of the second event, we started running out. Save them for the final event, but I was shocked by the demand, actually.
We in the UK and Ireland, we're just mad wrestling fans. We're like a bit rabid, because we're quite a way away from America. So when stuff like yourself comes over, if Mick Foley comes over to do the speaking tours or things like that, we kind of just go crazy for it, man, because it's nice to have, genuine, you're legitimate, author, legitimate wrestling, know-it-all kind of thing, so it's great to have someone like you come over and do those things.
I do think, and I'm not trying to hurt the feelings of my fellow Americans, but I do think that the UK is more of a literate society. I mean, the fact that people still buy newspapers, and they also will buy weekend newspapers to just luxuriate over on Saturday and Sunday, makes them a bit different than Americans. And so, I'm there selling a book, and in America, people will just look in your face and go, I don't read. You don't really hear much of that. At least among the people I met, no one was saying, hey, I don't read.
That's
Yikes.
Although I'd say in both countries, when you see some of the decisions made at the highest forms of government, it seems like a lot of people don't read.
Dude, let's. You know what? We're gonna ask the question about that. It's crazy when you're talking about people not reading. It just reminds me of the Bill Hicks bit. When he's like, "Oh, why do we got a reader? What are you reading for?" It's like it just. Reminds me of that, man, that great bit from the great Bill Hicks. But yeah, man, I mean, so you've been over in the UK, you're in Manchester, you're in London and the islands.
London, and Ireland was just it was supposed to be a social trip, but I ended up doing Maurice Shorthall's podcast while I was over in Dublin.
Nice, man. So when you were in England, did you have a Nando's or
Yes, of course I did. I had Nando's as soon as I got over there. I landed in the morning and I was walked over to a Greg's and purchased. When in the UK, this was in Scotland. I did get a Scottish pie at Greg's, which didn't thrill me. I was over there a year ago, and I had a Scottish pie in a pub, and that was a lot more satisfying, but to each his own.
Yeah, man. I mean, we saw some great pictures of you in a pub in Ireland as well, enjoying yourself, which is just fantastic. Did you have an iron brew whilst in Scotland?
Yeah, and my Instagram account was disabled. In the midst of everything, I received an Instagram message from someone who I knew. It was a reader and a wrestling fan. And he's like, oh, I'm trying to start a podcast. Can you press like and press this link? And I did. And before I knew it, people were contacting me and saying that they was asking me, are you selling Bitcom on Instagram? So my account is disabled now and I'm trying to get it back.
Pissed. That's not good when you're trying to promote a book, man.
No, it's not. It's like 1/3 of the social media arsenal has been disabled. It's like if you were, Vladimir Putin's army and someone burned a bridge that was a supply rack.
It did happen. It's so Keith, we're here to talk about the book mainly. Follow the Buzzards.
That would be good.
Yeah, that would be the best way to get going. Follow the Buzzards. Chris, I believe you messaged me this morning saying you ordered it on Kindle as well.
Yeah, got a Kindle copy because the hard copies are not available in the UK.
Not available until November, but I'm glad you got a Kindle copy. Yeah, when I was in London at an Inside the Ropes event, Rob Van Dam ordered a copy of my book on Kindle. So I imagine he hasn't read it yet. He appeared to be quite busy, but maybe he's reading it on the plane ride home right now.
Let's hope so, man. I mean, in comparison, do you kind of make a bit more money on the Kindle versions, or is it pretty much the same?
I'm not sure. I know that I make more on the audio. I make quite a bit on the audiobook versions, but of my books. And I'm about to record my audiobook version starting this weekend coming up.
Okay, cool.
I'm not going to do it all. I'm not going to be able to record the entire book in one weekend, but I'm about to start.
So anyone listening in the UK, you can get the book on Amazon Kindle at the moment. It's about £8. Well worth it. Definitely get it in there. And also, fuck it, man, buy the hard copy as well when it comes out.
And the book is going to be in sale. I walked into a W.H. Smith's when I was in London, and I asked them about when the book was coming in, and they said early November. So, if you want to wait till then, support it. If there's a local bookshop in your community, I'm all for supporting your local bookshop, just like all for supporting your local indie wrestling promotion.
Defo.
Yes, that we do indeed. We have some local run indie promotions that run in the UK, and we like to get as much as we can, don't we?
Yeah, definitely. We've got one coming up 22nd of this month as well.
Indeed,
I think, around the corner, down the road.
Yeah, literally a walking distance. Like it's so much cooler for us to do stuff like that.
The indie promotions that visit our local town. I mean, you've got people like Will Ospreay, Aussie Open. Like we've got pretty decent wrestlers coming.
It'd be pretty great if I could walk down the street and see Will Ospreay and Aussie Open. I mean, I can walk to the Barclays Center, but that's a different type of experience.
Sure.
Isn't there's someone running the Barclays Center tonight? Am I crazy?
Yeah, WWE. Yes, they're at the center tonight.
Are you not? You don't fancy it tonight then?
I'm not sure. I just returned from the UK, and I have a full-time job. I'm a senior producer at a television network in the United States, so I'm a little bit busy there today.
Yeah, I mean, your background is extensive. You've been working pretty at a high level since the 80s, man. Sorry to maybe
to date me, to remind it's a good thing about growing old.
I've just had my 40th birthday and I'm feeling it, man. So
yeah, I was feeling it at my 40th. In fact, I wasn't my 50th was a hard birthday for me. I was really in a bad mood for months when I turned 50. 60, I was a little, I was in a better frame of mind, pretty much because I destroyed lots of things during my 50th birthday. And by my 60th, I started repairing them.
Man, we'd love to get down the pub with you, I think. I think you'd be a fucking great crack, man.
Crack, and not crack like the American term, crack in the Gaelic way.
Yeah. I mean, we still say in England as well, we love the crack, you know what I mean? We go out for a decent night out.
Story, my good friend Bob Higgins tells the story. He's American born, and he went to see his cousins in Ireland when he was younger, and he didn't know them, and they're like, well, let's go downtown and have some crack. And he's like standing there, he's like, wow, they talk their way right in front of their parents. These people, they just don't care.
It's that laissez-faire attitude of the UK, man, and Ireland, you know.
Yeah.
But you know, you've done so much from TV producing. You've produced documentaries. You've written about true crime. You've written about wrestling extensively. Also, wanted to talk to you about your time you worked with WWE. We had Brian R. Solomon on recently.
He's a good friend.
Yeah, you know, and he's a really knowledgeable guy. Fantastic interview we had with him. And, you know, we love having guys like you and Brian on because, you know, we usually have wrestlers on who are, you know, talking about stuff they've done in their career. We talk about specific matches, angles, and, you know, what they're doing now and whatever. But kind of the way that, you know, legitimate writers will look at things, like what you've done with the Buzzards recently, you know, you're kind of, you know, the narrative that you've got going there is kind of the parallels between real life and wrestling, you know, and at that time of COVID, you know, is it a work, fake news and all this kind of stuff. Is fantastically written, really good stuff. And I do urge everybody to bloody go out there and buy it. So, I mean, what was it that kind of made you want to do that subject? Was it something that was thrown at you, or was it something that you kind of wanted to get into?
And my last book was called Too Sweet, Inside the Indie Wrestling Revolution.
Yeah.
And ended with the first broadcast of AEW Dynamite. And so I said, you know, obviously we need a sequel because, you know, people need to know how this all turns out. And I just thought the sequel would be about maybe the first year of AEW, the war between WWE and AEW. You know, there were a lot of question marks. Would AEW even survive that year? Would WWE just blow them away? Would they start to make serious inroads into the WWE audience? And what would happen to the indies that had supplied all this talent? Like, would WWE and AEW swoop in and grab the best indie personalities, and would it destroy the indies? Like, there were a lot of question marks. And by the time I finished the epilogue, the World Health Organization had declared an international pandemic. And at that point, I said to the executive editor at ECW Press, Michael Holmes, I think it's time for I think we need to switch gears somewhat. This is still a sequel to the first book, but this book needs to be about pro wrestling in the age of COVID-19. And what I wanted to do, and I was planning to do this anyway, I wanted to juxtapose, you know, this book with real world events. And COVID-19 made that creative device even more urgent or more necessary, because 2020, and I knew this was happening regardless of COVID, you had the US presidential election and you had Brexit going on. Those alone are very important events, you know, society altering events. And I thought, you know, wrestling doesn't live in a bubble. We can go back and forth between each of them. And then when COVID happened, you really weren't able to fully escape what was going on. I mean, you watch WrestleMania in an empty performance center, you're aware that we're living in the COVID era. Wrestling aspired to give people release and escape. I believe it did successfully provide a sanctuary. There was a lot of trial and error. You know, WWE was putting on shows in an empty arena. Eventually they came up with the Thunderdome, but it took a while. You know, AEW eventually put their wrestlers in the rows around the ring to create the feel of an old-time studio wrestling audience. We had this cinematic match. There had been cinematic matches before, but now the cinematic match was essential. And those two matches from WrestleMania 36, I think we'll look back at very fondly in the decades to come. AEW did the Stadium Stampede, and then the Indies didn't completely go away. Yeah. Game Changer Wrestling, you know, or GCW, became the #3 promotion, in my opinion, in the United States. And Ring of Honor ended up being sold to AEW, and the NWA had to start from scratch essentially. And New Japan, which isn't an indie by any means, but New Japan, didn't put on any shows for months. And then when they did put on shows, fans were socially distanced. There was a fraction of the people there, and they weren't allowed to cheer because of the fear that the bacteria would get into the air and infect people. So it was a very different time. We are still feeling the aftershocks somewhat, but if you're vaccinated, I don't believe that you are as frightened as you were at the beginning.
How was the age of COVID for you yourself?
Like everybody else, it was strange. It was frustrating. I can't call it exciting. In retrospect, I'm glad I was writing a book during that period because it gave me something to focus on day to day. And unlike with other books I've done where I was looking at things in hindsight, I was organizing and writing this book as things were transpiring. And sometimes I'd look back at a chapter a few weeks later and things had changed by that point. I also kept files and I'm like, oh, this is crucial information. For instance, and I mentioned this in the book, like early on, I was keeping a file of famous people who had COVID. First, it was like, a page long. And I was keeping track of American politicians who had COVID. And then, a massive chunk of the Trump administration came down with COVID, including like two of Donald Trump's children. And then Trump himself had COVID. Boris Johnson had COVID. And, we later found out nearly died from it. I mean, the royal family, much of the royal family had COVID, and so did royals in other parts of Europe. So, it was I'm not going to say a struggle because being on a ventilator in a intensive care unit is a struggle, but it was a challenge to keep up with everything that was transpiring, and information that I thought was so critical was now passé a few weeks later.
Yeah, it was a weird time. I mean, we started the podcast at the beginning of COVID because, I run my own business. I've got a shop that was shut down. I think, Jordan, you were furloughed and that for a bit.
No, I went back to work.
Oh,
I was working the whole time. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, that's right.
They didn't want me to stop.
Yeah, so it was weird because I had a bit more time. We got together and started the podcast. We had a bit more time to watch wrestling, so it gave us something to focus on and do, and it's just kind of grown out of that. So I mean, I hate to say we're thankful for COVID because obviously, but
I mean, I could say, oh, I'm thankful for it because I got a book out of it, but that wouldn't be very nice.
Absolutely, yeah.
I'm thankful for the genocide in Bosnia because I got I didn't write a book on it, but if I had, because some great reporting and I won an award. Of course, we're not that ghoulish.
No.
It's interesting to look back on, it wasn't just a period of health challenges. It was a very divisive period and still remains so. I mean, somebody recently said to me, was telling me these like crackpot theories about all the health problems you could have if you take the vaccine. And I do think a lot of that division is along political lines. And that a lot of that's in the book. And besides all the COVID polarization, we had the Black Lives Matter movement. It started years earlier, but it solidified and went around the world. And in pro wrestling, we had the speaking out movement. And these are conversations that we're going to be having for decades at least. And so these are all important topics to discuss. And they all, really came to the forefront during COVID. And you mentioned the podcast. I became a monthly columnist for Inside the Ropes magazine in the UK during COVID. And this is a newsstand wrestling magazine created during a time when people weren't even coming out of their homes or were just starting to. Yeah. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy. I mean, you mentioned, I think it's the first chapter or even the second chapter, you talk about the speaking out movement, and we've there's been a lot of stuff. I mean, we personally think that was something that needed to happen, and I think that with COVID and the wrestlers not being actively working, a lot of them, you know, people had time to ruminate upon things that had happened, and you know, online presence was a big thing, and it gave people that kind of environment that enabled them to come out and say, actually, while we're doing this is shit is going on, it needs to stop. And I think, you know, it's definitely helped the UK industry. I mean, we're not through the woods by a long shot yet, because there's still a few let's just say stragglers from the speaking out movement that are still kind of hanging around and sniffing around the business, that people are like, hold on a minute, you know. But it's definitely helped. And you think it was fairly big in America, the speaking out movement?
In America. And I remember, you know, and this is in the book, you know, but I remember when I was at an indie show, you know, an outdoor indie show, when speaking out first started, and listening to some of the guys talking about who might get called out and who might deserve to be called out, and who will be called out because they got involved with somebody who the other guys regarded as maybe a little unstable. But there being a lot of speculation and a lot of worry, because now every male in the industry was kind of going back over every, you know, lustful exchange they had.
Yeah.
Course of being a personality or celebrity of some sort. And it's like, well, will this person come forward? Will this person say this wasn't consensual? Will this person say it was forced? And women struggled because they're like, well, I've kind of put this in the past. Do I want to come out and speak about this? Are people going to call me names, because they invariably do? Are people going to accuse me of lying? And, you know, it was a painful period. And again, the discussion is far from over.
Yeah.
Well, it definitely isn't over. I mean, there's too many, even back here in the UK, like there's still, like Chris said, there's still people hanging around long after, you know, their attempted dalliances or whatever have, you know, been brought to light, and they've, yeah, it still needs work. Still really needs work.
And I was very careful about how I broach this in a book, because, you know, 10 years from now, someone will be able to walk into a library or a bookstore and open up this book and point at a name and either say, that person is a predator, or that woman is a liar, and she, you know, tries to ruin people's lives. And so I deliberately did not name any of the women involved, because, you know, if you're a special victims detective, you go on the assumption that, you know, these people are victims and that they shouldn't be, you know, they shouldn't be single. No one should be able to hunt them down and accuse them of toying with the truth. And with the men, I did include the defenses of the few wrestlers who really came forward and defended themselves. But I left a lot of other people out because I wasn't quite sure how those accusations would all sort themselves out. So Joey Ryan's defense is in there. David Starr's defense is in there. Matt Riddle's defense is in there, and Marty Scurll's defense is in there, because they went on social media and really, you know, made an issue in saying, here's what happened. I mean, in some cases, like in Marty Scurll's, he admitted that he showed very poor judgment, and he explained where his mind was working at the time, but asked people not to go after his victim. Some people have criticized me for including that because they're saying, well, you know, I see an awful lot of people defending themselves in your book, but I'm taking a snapshot of that time, and that's the material I had to work with. And I stand by my approach unless you show me an alternative.
Yeah, it's always going to be a very tough subject to broach, because you know, you do have whatever way you did it, Keith, you were going to get shit from someone, dude.
Yes, I was, and I knew that.
You were going to get someone, you're going to piss somebody off, you know. So, yeah. You know, the fact that you've, you know, whatever you've put in there, whatever you've left out was going to piss someone off. So, you know, but
I knew that, and just like by merely mentioning U.S. politics, I knew that I was going to antagonize people. I mean, you know, first of all, I didn't put words in any politician's mouth. If a politician is quoted in the book and maybe he doesn't sound like he's telling the truth, or he sounds a bit clownish, that's what the guy said. I didn't write that copy for him. And, you know, I know that, you know, America remains a very politically divided country. And I have read online people saying that, you know, my political bias taint the entire book. Again, I was trying to be as objective as possible, but I'm not going to leave something out because in too much of the world, it makes a certain politician look like a buffoon. And you for that conclusion, not me. Yeah. I'm not saying this guy's a buffoon. I'm saying this is what this guy said. Now, go
on. No, it's fine.
No, that's it.
Is it? No, I get you. Like, you know, everybody has their own biases. Everybody does, regardless, you know, and
we all do.
Of course, you know, I don't get it twisted. This country is equally as politically divided as any other country as well. You know, you know, it's fucking crazy. I mean, we do have, you know, this country, I think in the UK, we do know where our bread is buttered to a point, because we do have the universal healthcare system. We do have, you know, the social safety net in place, you know, so people are looked after to a point. You know, the one issue I did have it with America in general over the time of COVID was, if ever there was a time, and I don't want to, you know,
I want to hear it. Go ahead.
I don't want to piss anybody off, but, you know, if ever there was a time in US history to implement a universal healthcare system, it was the time of COVID. If not then fucking when, you know?
You're not going to get an argument from me over that. And it's interesting that, you know, I just got my third booster, and that was free. So, the money for that comes from somewhere. Certainly we have the money in this country, and we could find the money in this country if that was a priority for us. And again, not going to, if I talk too much, people are going to say, I revealed myself to be a socialist militant, and therefore the book doesn't have credibility. So yes, of course, it's heartbreaking as a human being to see people who can't afford to pay for health coverage, and it could endanger their lives. I don't think that makes you a political radical. It means you just care about your fellow human being.
Well, I mean, I am a socialist radical. I will have to. So I am like.
If we were speaking in a pub, I would be a lot more forthcoming about my own feelings, but we're not speaking in a pub.
Sure.
We're speaking to the public, and while we're speaking to the public, I do, you know, want to obtain my objectivity as best.
That's fair enough.
Of course, you know. I mean, but the thing is, you know, I think in the UK, our idea of socialism and the idea of socialism in America is completely fucking different.
Well, it's a dirty word in America. Yeah. I mean, look, we already have Social Security. We have Medicaid in America. So there are aspects of socialism that are in place. For that matter, the government pays for the police and the firefighters and sanitation. So it isn't all privatized. Yeah. But again, this is another conversation for another time. But it all ties into what's in the book.
Absolutely.
It's all about, pro wrestling during the time of COVID-19. And we look at real world issues that were affecting people. People were in hospitals on ventilators, and that money has to come from somewhere. And in certain countries, like in India, and this is in the book, people were scrounging money to pay for ventilators to buy for the hospitals there. So these are big issues about life and death that needed to be addressed. And just because it's a wrestling book doesn't mean that material needs to be left out. I also don't think that wrestling fans are incapable of stretching their brains beyond wrestling sometimes. I've been knocking around for a while and writing books the last couple of years. And, there are very smart wrestling fans there, us included. Yeah. We love this stuff. And, we analyze this stuff and we have opinions about other things. And that's who this book is written for. The wrestling fan who doesn't want a straight up wrestleography. This guy beat this guy and this title changed. But what does it all mean? Why was this good?
That's why it was good, because you've kind of got both of these narratives going side by side. And at times you can look at politics is the biggest fucking analogy for wrestling. You can see a lot of it is a work, man, and a lot of what is legit, what is a shoot, it's
and we don't know. We don't know. Wrestling, it's a very delicate dance. It's the dance of the seven veils.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fantastic. I mean, I love what you've done with it. It's a different kind of wrestling book, and to be honest, I feel that it will do a lot of wrestling fans a great service to take their head out of purely the wrestling world and kind of see the real world side by side that we do have.
And I think a lot of wrestling fans do. Yeah. Because I'm getting a lot of feedback from people. And I was just in the UK and I was speaking. I spoke to hundreds of wrestling fans while I was there. And, all of those people look at it the same way we do.
It's great, man. It's So, I mean, apart from the politicization and the kind of the way that COVID was dealt with in wrestling companies, did you see you'd have more inside knowledge than we would over this, but did you see how it was dealt with differently in the two companies? I mean, we had a public view of, everyone was kind of, okay, not everybody, a lot of AEW fans or like a diehard group of AEW fans kind of shat on WWE a little bit because they got rid of a load of people during the pandemic and said, oh, couldn't you have just fucking paid them? Why did you have to get rid of them? And all this kind of stuff. And then WWE fans were saying, oh, well, you're just buying you're just taking on a load of WWE old guys and all this kind of thing. But do you think that the two companies dealt with COVID in a different way? Or do you think ultimately they kind of had to deal with it?
Look, Tony Khan started AEW to wage war, and to go after WWE. And Vince McMahon, he loves nothing more than someone coming after him so he can fight back. So they went at it, and they both were armed. I mean, Tony Khan comes from a billionaire family, as we all know. Yeah. And so this wasn't like myself and you and a couple of friends know some guy who owns a tire center in town, and he gives us 20 grand to start a wrestling promotion. And, 2 months later, we're out of business. These are guys who can, outlast one another, or, they can have a long protracted war. Yeah. And I think they went about it in the best way that they thought that, that they could conceive, and they're still going at it.
I mean, they've definitely both got the means. You know,
The means, right?
You know, even Tony Khan recently said in the infamous media scrum that happened recently, he said, "I've got a lot more fucking money, and I'm not going to take this shit." You know, so that goes to show you the kind of the attitude of him. Is like, "Fuck it, man, I'm in for a penny, in for a pound."
Yeah, yeah, and I mean that makes it exciting too. And it's so interesting because I had to end the book at a certain stage, you know, because I couldn't write, you know, a 2,000 word book. I mean, I could have, but I don't know how many people would have read it. So, you know, I ended it in January 2022. I started in January 2020. I made it like 2 years, you know, and that's where I closed the circle. And it's so intriguing because I kept updating the book because I'd mentioned Braun Strowman and I'd say, oh, but he was laid off. And then I'd mention Bray Wyatt and he was laid off. And then I'd mention, you know, Johnny Gargano, but he was laid off. And now all these people are back, and Hit Row. All these people, or most of these people, are back. And that's another story for another time. But I couldn't even conceive of what the next wrestling book in this series would be because, you know, who would have imagined that media scrum 3 months ago?
Yeah.
You know, who would have imagined that, you know, Bray Wyatt and The Fiend would be back, or Bray Wyatt and Braun Strowman would be back. So it's just unfolding in ways we couldn't have conceived. And, you know, I'm going to sit back as a fan and see what transpires, and maybe it might be another year before I say, okay, this is the book I think that needs to be written.
Do you think that was part of the plan? Lay a few people off and tell them, we'll bring you back when we're ready?
No, I don't think so, but I don't know. It seems hard to imagine.
Because it seems like a lot of them didn't even entertain AEW's advance.
You know, look, a guy like I saw Johnny Gargano backstage at you know, a Q&A that he did with Kenny McIntosh from Inside the Ropes during SummerSlam weekend, and you know, Johnny Gargano's wife was having a baby, so this was a gift to him because now he could spend time with, you know, his new child. And you know, these guys like WWE took care of people financially. I mean, even writing for their magazine for 22 years, you know, they overpay. I'm going to tell you that. I was sometimes surprised at the amount of money I got to write about wrestling. And that's maybe one of the reasons I can't criticize the company, among other things. Mm-hmm. I've also been entertained by them for, you know, my entire life. And so have 4 generations of my family been. You know, but I don't think there was a plan that we're going to lay all these people off and then bring them back. I mean, maybe I'm a fool. Maybe I don't know anything about business. Maybe that was the plan, but it's hard to imagine for me.
I mean, I know it would be difficult to write about this subject without kind of criticizing WWE to a point, but the whole business that's gone on now with Vince McMahon leaving the company, the issues internally.
Book by the time that happened, but it ties into the speaking out movement, which we spoke about earlier.
Yeah.
You know, in another era, women might have been, and I'm not saying Vince is innocent. I'm not saying he's guilty.
Sure.
I know nothing of the circumstances of these charges. I don't even know the precise names. I've heard speculation, but I don't know the names of these people. I don't know anything about them. You know, but in another era, if you were a billionaire CEO, you could do as you pleased and you had the money to make problems go away. And maybe now women have decided that, you know, getting paid off, that's not all they're out for. You know, maybe they're like sending the message, don't think we're a bunch of gold diggers, because we're not. And, you know, that's also traced to speaking out. And before speaking out, it was part of Me Too. And without Me Too, which is something outside of wrestling, you wouldn't have had speaking out. So when I write a wrestling book, I can't ignore the outside world because the outside world comes into wrestling.
Yeah, people are people, you know.
Yeah.
So I mean, I love the book. I love the real world and the wrestling world coming together, and actually people having to not do the usual mental gymnastics that they do to separate the two, because
Right.
there's a lot of that goes on in the international wrestling community. You know, it is a lot of mental gymnastics get done for people to kind of justify their own ideas about why shit has happened.
Right.
When really, if you just open your eyes and have a look around, you'll see ultimately why some shit has happened and why things play out in the way that they do.
Sometimes there are things you see in the ring that you wouldn't know about until you talk to the people involved.
Yeah.
I remember WrestleMania 3, and Hulk Hogan, went to body slam Andre the Giant, and Andre the Giant fell on top of him, and it looked like Joey Morella slapped that mat 3 times. And I thought, wow, Joey Morella screwed up. And a couple of months later, I'm sitting in an airport in a rainstorm next to Joey Janela. And I'm like, oh, you must have felt like garbage, when you accidentally slapped the mat for the 3rd time. And he's like, no, that was deliberate. That was because there were going to be rematches. I didn't think in those terms. There was no internet at the time. So even though I was working for WWE, I wasn't reading all the analysis from every armchair quarterback, as we say in the States.
Yeah.
Learn, what the motives are long after the fact. And that's what makes being a fan satisfying sometimes.
There's always money in a rematch. Always. Yeah. Especially in boxing.
Yeah. Unless it's a rematch between 2 people you care nothing about.
True that. Yeah. I'm not really sure how often you sort of check social media and stuff like that.
I do all the time.
But I mean, Twitter's a pretty rough place to be.
Mm-hmm.
It
is.
The IWC, the Internet Wrestling Community, as they like to call themselves, like, it is the most divisive of places. The tribal fandom is pretty grim. Have you seen much of that? Does that factor into your daily sort of thinking?
I mean, I monitor it. I try to stay at. I've never expressed my opinions about this match sucked, this match was great. And, the reason for that is I've never taken a bump. And so I don't know the challenges of stepping through the ropes and what goes on in a match and why something might fall apart or appear to fall apart. I would rather observe and learn. And again, I'm in a position where I can observe and learn because that's part of my job. If I didn't have this job, which allows me to speak to both people on the inside and people who are astute observers like yourselves, I don't know, maybe I would be part of that, an active participant in that internet wrestling community, because I'd want to have an identity for myself online somewhere. But I don't need that because I've been able to form my own identity in the world of wrestling. And I'm grateful for that.
Funnily enough, me and Chris have taken bumps. That's how we initially met. We met in wrestling training. And I don't think I'm fit enough to take a bump ever again, though. I don't know about you, Chris.
Mate, at this point in my life, I mean, I romanticize getting back in the ring and like taking bumps again, but I'd probably shit my pants on one back bump now. So I don't think that's ever going to happen. I mean, we went to Cardiff to watch Clash at the Castle, and we were with our very good friend Matty Diamond D, and we gave each other a couple of chops, and it was like, oh, they never used to hurt that bad. It's like I'm a bit.
But I mean, for that matter, when I was 10 years old and I used to wrestle with my friends, and I remember my friend John Diagardi put this kid in a figure 4 leg lock. You know, if he did that now when we're in our 60s, not only would he have, you know, injured that person, he would have injured himself. So, you know, as your body ages, that stuff gets harder and harder to do, unless you're like Carl Gotch or Lou Thesz, and even those guys couldn't do it anymore at a certain stage.
One thing I did want to ask you as well, as you're a TV producer as well, and you've done a lot of TV work, and you're still in the industry now.
Indeed.
So did you do, I mean, we spoke a little bit before, myself and JB before. Did you do a bit of TV production for WCW at all?
I never did any wrestling TV production. I was a freelance writer. I started out as a print writer, and I wrote about wrestling very early on. I started out 19 years old as a writer. So I've been doing this for 44 years now. And because professional wrestling was a topic I knew quite a bit about, I was able to write about it. And because I started writing about wrestling, I came to the attention of WWE. I mean, I was interviewing their talent, and I was eventually brought on to write for the WWF magazine. And then I spent 22 years there. And in that time, I co-wrote the autobiographies of Ric Flair and Freddie Blassie and superstar Billy Graham. And then, you know, after 22 years, my retainer was taken away. But to this day, WWE throws me work. And so I'm certainly not anti-WWE by any chance, but by any means. But my television production started separate. I was on parallel lines, and I've always written about true crime as well. Yeah. And I've written about, just like I've written books about a variety of genres, I have also produced television shows about a number of genres. And, you know, true crime is the one I'm probably best known for. And so I never did pro wrestling production. I just, you know, like right now, I mainly produce programs involving true crime for television in the US. And then I write for a number of people on the side, but wrestling is the one that draws the most attention to me.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of the professional wrestling documentaries. So, I mean, the Beyond the Mat is a classic. Wrestling with Shadows. Yeah. But also one of my favorite documentaries, just in general of documentaries, it just so happens to have wrestling involved in it, is Bigger, Stronger, Faster, The Side Effects of Being American.
Remember.
Great documentary. Absolute great work from Chris Bell. So, I mean, I can see you doing something like that. Have you ever thought about doing some kind of like...
Yes, but, you know, my full-time gig takes up a lot of my time.
Sure.
And, you know, when I'm writing, you know, I mean, I have to get to locations to interview people, but it's different. When I'm doing TV, because you are producing in the field, it means you have to be present in the field. And I can't be interviewing someone or supervising a TV crew and then run off and do a podcast. You know, I'm working on a script today for my full-time job, and I'm able to, you know, take an hour away and you know, do a podcast. So I just don't think at this phase of my career, I could divide my time like that.
Did you have to spend much time with Ric Flair for his book?
I did.
Was it fun?
Most of the time.
I mean, I can imagine. Yeah, I can imagine the stories he was, you know, relaying must have been.
I mean, you know, stories are in the book. There's some stories that didn't make it to the book, you know, but a lot of them are in the book. And you know, he also is an emotional fellow, and it was painful sometimes to see what he put himself through. I mean, he doesn't make it a secret that he can be his own worst critic and his own worst enemy. And, you know, to see him up close wasn't always it wasn't always the best experience. I mean, the guy's was very hard on himself. And maybe if he wasn't, he wouldn't have been, had the status that he enjoys today.
Did you watch his last match?
I was there.
Yeah.
And I wrote about it for Inside the Ropes magazine. So, this isn't a secret. Being in the building, I was actually quite excited. And look, I knew he wasn't 32-year-old Ric Flair. I knew this was a compromised Ric Flair. I mean, look, the guy was in a coma and was given, if the story's true, a 5% chance of survival. But I thought he handled himself adequately. And I thought he was very fortunate to be with people like Jeff Jarrett and Andrade and Jay Lethal. And they were able to carry the match in a very successful way. And, the match ended and the crowd was happy and confetti came down. And I was pretty exuberant. And then I went on Twitter and I started to read the comments from people who were watching this match at home and how mortified they were and how they were characterizing this as elder abuse. And one guy who I respect wrote, "This didn't only embarrass me as a wrestling fan, it embarrassed me as a human being." And I wrote about this, for Inside the Ropes. And I realized, wow, there was really a dichotomy between those who watched the match live and those who watched it at home. Yeah. And I'm kind of glad I was there live because I had another perspective on an event that people will be talking about for a long, long time, long after Ric Flair is here anymore.
Do you think you'll do another one?
Another what?
Another match, yeah.
Another one? You'll have to ask Ric Flair that question. I think he probably wants to, knowing Ric Flair.
I'm sure he made a few quid off of that one, and I'm sure
I hope he did.
Yeah, and to be honest, after seeing the match, I watched it on TV, and after watching it on TV, I do hope he made a few quid because it. Like you saying, you might have got a different idea being there, but did you watch it on TV afterwards, or have you not?
I watched some of it. Actually, the next day, I got together, Kenny McIntosh from Inside the Ropes. I think we were in his room, and we watched some of this together. Right. And I think we were saying, oh, I see why some people said this at this point. But then I imagine, I'm in the wrestling world, and in the wrestling world, certain things are completely acceptable, like a death match. You bash someone over the head with light tubes, and you slam someone on thumbtacks, and it's like another night out, and I imagine what would it be like? Like, let's say I have a first date with somebody and it's like, oh, I really think you're an interesting guy. It's like, want to go back to my place and watch Ric Flair's final match? And then I imagine this woman sitting there and she's like, this is the stuff you like, you animal, you savage.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I'd probably bring her back to watch the cinematic match of Goldust versus Rowdy Roddy Piper.
And she would probably enjoy that if she was, partially, if connected with you on some dating site, you'd probably have that much in common.
I do try and get my missus to watch wrestling and occasional stuff. And she's a Dusty Rhodes fan. She likes his promos.
He's a great man. It's funny. Like, my kids are older now, so when they were little, I could easily get them to watch wrestling. Now they're older, so I can't always get them to watch wrestling. My oldest child, Dylan Mars Greenberg, is a filmmaker of some repute in New York City. Dylan's 25 now and certainly understands the allure of professional wrestling and why it hits the nerve that it does. And Dylan's been associated for years with Troma, which is a company that makes horror comedies. So, you know, the parallel is certainly apparent. And I'd like to feel I was an influence, at least that much, in exposing Dylan to wrestling at a young age.
You did good.
Apparently.
I mean, wrestling is a very weird and wacky world within itself. And, you know, like you're saying, certain things that are acceptable in wrestling, people that aren't wrestling fans would look at and go, what the fuck is this? Like, what?
Right. What the
you
fuck
know?
is, like, I remember, you know, I brought a girlfriend to a GCW show. We watched the death match, and, you know, she said, why is there a door in there? Like, why was there a door in the ring? And that's a perfectly reasonable question. Like, you know, you're supposed to be having a wrestling match. Like, everyone's seen wrestling in the Olympics. You know, no one's ever brought a door into, you know, onto the mat.
I mean, it is a perfectly sane question to ask.
Yes.
But I would like to ask, I mean, I don't know how, we never really discussed how much time you had. Like, so
Well,
should we?
I would like to wind it down since I have a job.
Of course. Yeah, that's something like I can see we're getting close to an hour, and I'm like, I don't think this ever came up in any of the emails.
No, I mean, we had Eric Watts on for like 3 hours plus and Chris Hamrick on for like 3 hours plus. They were fucking brutal, man. You know, so we won't keep you for 3.5 hours.
Well, I mean, was Eric Watts enjoyable?
Oh, it was great.
Good. Yeah, he's hilarious.
You know,
I'd listen to Eric Watts for 3 hours.
Chris Hamrick was just fantastic as well. Like,
yeah.
He's just batshit crazy, but we love him. He's just, you know, fantastic.
Yeah.
And Max Payne. Max Payne was wild one as well.
Yeah, Max Payne, he was on for a good couple of 2.5 hours as well with us. Yeah.
If you need to help anyone with a documentary, I think Max might need a call.
Yeah, well, I don't know if again, all this stuff takes time.
Yeah.
So, you know, we should wind it down. You've got a day job to do. Let's just talk about the book for a second. Like, you know, Follow the Buzzards, pro wrestling in the age of COVID-19. In the UK, it will be available in November. Is that right?
I think it's the 2nd
well,
or the 4th.
It's in November. You can order it now, and you can also get the Kindle version right now.
And you also said that in, you know, all decent local bookshops you can find it. So
all local bookshops. And you know what? I would even say this. If you know a good community bookstore, go down there and order it there. Give them the business. Let them, you know, make a few pence off of you. But, you know, because, you know, I believe in supporting the local bookshop.
Hey, that's good to hear. Yeah, support your local businesses.
Don't go to fucking Waterstones, people. Yeah, don't go Waterstones. Go to your local bookshop. Go in there and support you. I mean, we're all for that, man. I mean, and in wrestling as well, support your local indie promotion.
Yeah, we need the indies. It's in my last book about the indie wrestling revolution. There's a saying: the indies matter, and the indies do matter. Without the indies, we wouldn't have the people on top that we have now.
That's right, man. Everybody's got to start somewhere. That's right.
So, Keith Elliot Greenberg, we are so thankful that you've given us this time today. We're really thrilled that you decided to jump on with us. Hopefully, when there's some more time, or if you're back in the UK, we'll gladly hit up the pub and we will knock back one or two. Enjoy the crack, if you will.
Yeah,
and I would imagine it might be more than one or two, to be honest.
No, the book is fantastic. I must say, it's fantastic. I'm not all the way through it quite yet. But yeah, I'm eating my way through on the daily commute on the train, and it's fantastic. You're a fantastic writer. You've got, you know, what you've done with it is absolutely fantastic. And anyone who's a wrestling fan, or even if you're not a wrestling fan, just to have a little peek into an industry to see how they dealt with it through COVID. Like, you know, the restaurants had to deal with certain shit. You know, warehouses had to deal with it, and wrestling is an industry in itself. And Keith has fantastically written out how wrestling dealt with COVID-19, and it's a great book.
Thank you so much.
No worries, man. Thank you again for joining us, Keith. It's been an absolute pleasure, man.
Keith, take care, mate. Thank you.
As I'm sure you guys can tell.
Cheers. Take care. Bye-bye.
Wait, let me get back to work. Thank you.
There you have it, man.
There we go. So cool.
Keith Elliot Greenberg.
And yeah, we can't thank him enough for giving us the time today. It's a Monday afternoon in Brooklyn, New York. So, he's probably still working. Yeah.
Yeah, he's probably just taken a lunch break just so he could do, you know what I mean? He's pulled himself away from his computer. And like I say, the guy is a legitimate, a legitimate badass. He has been producing television programs for years. He's been, writing books about true crime, about wrestling, about about 80s bands. He's a plethora of subjects that he has been writing about and creating content about. And we have just had him on the show talking about his latest book, Follow the Buzzards, Pro Wrestling in the Age of COVID-19. Fantastic book, a different read to your usual wrestling book.
Yeah, very different compared to your usual, pro wrestling, not fluff, because that's not a nice way to put it. But
sure. Shout out to ECW Press as well, our friends at ECW Press.
Thank you to ECW Press for helping us with this opportunity. And, long may our small allegiance with ECW Press continue.
Yeah, absolutely. Our loving relationship with ECW Press that we have going. They're great guys. So yeah. Sorry, bro. Crack on, son. Yeah.
So if you made it to the end, thank you. And for those that are still listening / watching, let's talk about the ones that are watching first, because you know what to do. We've mentioned it once or twice. Something needs a slap, and I'm not talking about me or Chris.
That's right. You got to slap the little bell, subscribe. You don't have to turn on notifications. Just fucking slap the bell and subscribe, because you should keep notifications on, because then you'll get notifications of fantastic interviews like this with Keith Elliot Greenberg. Like we said before, we've interviewed people like Brian R. Solomon, Max Payne, Eric Watts, the list is endless.
Santino,
That's right.
all
Billy
of those.
Barty, if you want a bit of controversy,
Like I said, we don't discriminate. Wrestling personality, wrestling fan, whatever. Like if they've got something to say, they can share it here, whether or not it's to people's taste or not.
That's right.
And I'm pretty sure a lot of the stuff that Keith just said was to a lot of people's tastes. So, if you haven't subscribed already, please do, and chuck us a little comment, a little like, or whatever, if you want to do that as well. And for those that are listening, and Ireland, we are talking to you. Thank you. We have to keep thanking you, Ireland, because you're the one that keeps pushing us up the charts. Why?
Just keep on keeping on, mate. They are pushing us up the charts. We fucking love it.
Oh yeah.
It's just fantastic to get that kind of feedback. I mean, it's always nice to know that people are enjoying what you're doing, because we enjoy what we do anyway. Is any other bits of
let's be honest, we fucking love this.
Oh, we love it, dude. We just love getting on doing these bits. There's a couple of it's obviously I'm your Pappy t-shirt wearing right now, because today it is
Eddie Guerrero's birthday.
Yeah. It is also Tony Khan's. That's right. It is also Tony Khan's birthday today, so I'm sure he'll be racking up a couple of fatties.
Fulham fans have already, wished that man.
They've already wished him a happy birthday.
In their own way.
As only Londoners can. We love it. We're going to keep doing it. Again, we've had another fantastic guest there, Keith Elliot Greenberg, New York Times best-selling author, TV producer. Fantastic guy to have on, and a very knowledgeable wrestling personality right there. And we're going to keep them coming, baby.
Yeah, and that's Yeah, exactly what Chris said. We are so thrilled that anyone has stuck around to carry on listening to this. For now, we will say goodbye. You know, the best Chris and all the wrestling podcasts, as you might have just been watching,
Yeah.
and me, little old JB. So
The main man, JB. It's always the main man, JB, bro. The moniker must be said.
So thank you for sticking around. We love you too. Take care, guys. We will see you soon.
Peace.